Hello and welcome to episode 3 of our Amoris series, focusing on the document on family and marriage written by Pope Francis called Amoris Laetitia, or the Joy of Love. In our previous episodes, we looked at how the Church embraces the reality of family life and how in our families we can share in a wonderful vision of God's love. In today's episode, we'll look in detail at Pope Francis' beautiful meditation on St. Paul's well-known passage on love in 1 Corinthians, and we'll ask what true love really is. Later, we'll get practical and spiritual advice both from our panel of guests and from John and Claire Grabowski, who for over 20 years have been helping engaged and married couples strengthen their relationships and have worked together on the Pontifical Council for the Family. But first, let's take a look at this short video of lots of different couples from different ages and stages in their marriages, reflecting on what love means to them and also giving some great advice on the key to a happy marriage.
1, 2, 3. Love is patient and
love is kind.
Love is not jealous or boastful.
Love is not arrogant or rude.
Love does not insist on its own way.
It is not irritable or resentful.
It does not rejoice at wrong, but rejoices in the right.
Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things.
From 1 Corinthians chapter 13. Well, we are...
We're 50 years married this year, and Pierce is 80 this year, in a few weeks' time. So we've survived a lot.
Oh, I could remember that very well because I was very, very cautious about ever telling any girl ever that I loved her. I told Sue that I loved her just before we got engaged. So that would have been in March 1968.
The second time I went to Portugal, the first one after meeting him, that weekend was so amazing. He already introduced me to his family. He was different. It was like a sense of family with him all the time. Like, I knew he was the one. And then he started talking about trying to arrange a job in Spain. So I could see he was serious. And I thought, like, wow, this is the love of my life.
You know, after maybe a month or so of dating and kind of going out to the cinema and loads of different things that we were chatting, and we were like, oh, right, well, this is really going well. It felt really natural, like really comfortable.
By the grace of God, I do remember praying an awful lot about it, because I thought to myself, you know, he's a bit mad, really. How are we going to survive all this?
A lot of the challenges are challenges society puts on you. When we were going out, people constantly going, when you're engaged, when's the date? Then it'll be when are you going to start a family? Have you bought your house? These are the things that will happen when it's the right time, that you can't force it. It has to be when the couple are really ready for each of those steps.
And I had been dying to tell him, I love you. But I didn't want to say it, and maybe he would be scared. And then when he said it, I was like, yes, I can now say it myself as well.
Oh, that chapter 4 is essential reading. You know, if it can open our eyes after 50 years of marriage, it can start young married couples on a far, far better footing than anything the world can offer them these days.
In Amoris Laetitia, what I read that has helped me, or is helping me through our marriage, is the part that, well, love is patient, and we cannot try to change each other. If it's difficult changing ourselves, imagine how difficult it is changing someone else. No, it's a process. It's something that takes time. Nobody's perfect, and sometimes we focus and we waste energy thinking about someone else's defects, or in this case, Antonio's. And, well, that's a 1%. He's an amazing husband. And, yeah, it's that part that sometimes you have to take into account that, yeah, nobody is perfect.
I just think that, like, keep talking to each other all the time, and that's how hopefully we'll get through the challenges. And I mean, when Seamus's dad died, that was a horrific time for both of us, and we were just a year going out the week before, and we got through that really by chatting to each other and keeping that lines of communication open. So hopefully we'll We won't do any silent treatments. We'll just keep talking to each other all the time.
What happens when we actually have an argument? How do we deal with it? For me, it's let's leave it at that now. Let a couple of hours go by, and let's come back to it later on. But we're in the heat of the moment just now. Let's just not say another single word and leave it a wee while and come back. And nearly always when we come back at a lower level and at an easier level to sort the thing out. So for me, it's more a question of let's just back off. That's my way of handling it.
And sometimes the problems don't get resolved, really. But I mean, we certainly would never let the sun go down on our anger. Never.
We compromise.
Never.
If God wasn't like the third part of our marriage, it wouldn't work.
It's not only the third part, but you also need to be conscious that it is the third part. And you need to invite God into your life. And, you know, we're both very lively people. And so it is very important to kind of learn from people that have more experience than we do and actually ask them questions about it.
And whenever we have a doubt, thinking like, what would Jesus do in this case? And then the answer is easy, and then you find the solution.
Because it's all about love.
Yeah.
I would say love is, in a sense, it's the Trinity. It's Sue and I together, but with the Lord. I don't think that without our faith in Jesus Christ and our Catholic faith, we would ever have survived 50 years because we're so different. So for me, it's the business of Sue and I are together, but we're together by the grace of God and by His power and not by our own. And I think that's what's holds it together, and hopefully will hold it together as long as we both shall live.
Welcome back to the Amoris studio, where I'm now joined by psychologist and family and marriage therapist and author of several parenting books, Owen Connolly, by Susan Gately, who's involved with the Focolare New Families movement in Ireland, and by Dom Perham, who's involved with Alpha Ireland and the community of Nazareth. Thank you all for joining us on the programme today. It's really telling that a couple that's married 50 years says, you know, every couple, especially newly married couples, should read chapter 4. There's so much in it. What in chapter 4 struck you particularly and made you think, yeah, that'll really help my marriage?
I think the one about love forgives, I think that's just so important, you know, and in our family we have this phrase that we've always used, which is start again, you know. So in other words, we'd have a row or someone would go and then one of us would say, or we'd say to each other, we start again. And we used to do it in front of the kids all the time, you know, so they would see us having a row, getting annoyed, and then saying, we start again, and we start again, you know. And then it was lovely. I remember one time when the kids were quite young, and I heard the two of them were in the bathroom washing their teeth or something, and obviously there was a row, and I think the older one clattered the little fella, and the next thing I heard him saying, sorry, we start again. And the other fellow was going, ah, and then he said, hit me, go on, hit me, you know. And so I thought that was really nice that they had actually, it had spread out to them, you know.
And they'd watched and learned from what you said.
Yeah.
What about you, John?
Well, I think the thing that strikes me most is this idea that love is always hoping, and it doesn't keep a record of wrongs. And this is something that I think in chapter 4 of Amoris and throughout Pope Francis's ministry, with the idea of mercy and the reaching out rather than the keeping something inside you. This idea of hope is so needed in our society right now, particularly in relationships. The desire for perfection and fulfillment that you look for in another person, as opposed to the giving of yourself to someone else, in the hope that your life and your marriage could lead to something bigger and greater. But that means you have to let go of things, and that means you have to have hope. I think this element of chapter 4 really struck me.
Is it then, Owen, that we really need to understand what the real love is? You know, that we're focused too much on this idea of love being Hollywood romance, fireworks, love being a feeling, whereas it's hard work.
It is indeed, and and it took all of 50 years for that couple to come to that very important understanding. And the same with myself at 48 years married. It took me all of the 48 to date and still learning. So there is never a time when you're not learning about loving. and loving as I think we need to understand. It isn't just the fluffiness. There is an attachment that happens with people. They become, they like what you look like, and they want to embrace you, and they think you're going to be the best person ever in their lives. And that's fine, and that's wonderful. And I think there is a beautiful design of God that wants us not to be alone, and therefore he brings us together. That's really beautiful. But then there is a work that needs to be done in that relationship where we share love with one another. That's a very important thing. And that is an active role. It's not a feeling thing. And that's really what's very important in
So it's really a decision that we have to make every day,
Yes,
isn't it?
yes.
We'll be coming back to this discussion very shortly, where we'll get lots more practical advice on how we can improve communication and strengthen our marriages. But first we'll hear from John and Claire Grabowski, who share some of their insights on Chapter 4 of Amoris Laetitia. My next guests are one of 10 couples chosen from around the world by Pope Benedict to sit on the Pontifical Council for Family in 2009. This council assists the Pope on issues that relate to marriage and the family. They've also been helping engaged and married couples for over 20 years. And John was a contributor at the Synod on the Family. It's great to be joined now by John and Claire Grabowski. Thank you so much for joining us on the programme today.
Thank you very much, Wendy, for having us. It's a pleasure.
So first question to you guys is just what was your overall reaction to Amoris, and in particular the chapter on love in marriage?
I did what Pope Francis says not to do. I tore through the document, trying to read it as quickly as I could because I knew I'd spend the next day talking to reporters about their questions. But when I got to chapter 4, I was amazed because here was this beautiful, rich commentary that was reflection, meditation on St. Paul's hymn to love in 1 Corinthians 13. One commentator later called it the beating heart of the document. There was no inclination or hint of this in Pope Francis's catechesis on the family. So I was stunned by its beauty. And I actually said to Claire, this is something we should have our children read with us.
He was so excited about it, and we were getting close to Lent. So together we decided, why don't we ask the children to read this with us? So he sent out an email challenging the kids to meditate on this beautiful chapter and on Pope Francis's words about it during the time of Lent. And we all did this, and then we emailed each other just what the Lord was teaching us and how we were growing and what touched us. And it was a beautiful way to connect with our children, to connect with the church, and to just receive God's wisdom on the gift of love.
For just your everyday family, how practical do you think Amoris Laetitia is? How grounded do you think it is to implement in our everyday lives?
I guess being a theologian, I have a tendency to intellectualize the faith. The wonderful thing about Pope Francis is he doesn't let people like me get away with that. He shows us that Christian love, as St. Paul describes it, as he describes it, makes very concrete, practical demands on us. We have to be patient and slow to anger with others. We have to recognize the claims others make on us, even when we're stressed. I think Pope Francis really speaks as a pastor. We've had 2 scholar popes before him, and now we have a pastor who has his own pastoral ministry and experience to draw on, and he does that in this document.
Maybe you can tell us just a little bit what your favourite thing is, or the most practical thing that you read or learned in chapter 4.
One of the ones that really stands out is not letting the sun go down on your anger, which means making sure that you are reconciled with each other before you go to sleep. This doesn't mean that you agree with each other or you've conquered all your problems. It means that you know you love each other. You're going to love each other even when you don't agree, and you're willing to work on your relationship. You're willing to say, let's put this aside and talk about it in the morning, but I just want you to know I love you. I love you despite our differences.
And what about for you, John? What was the one thing that you really thought that's going to really help us in our marriage?
Our first reaction when we are annoyed should be one of heartfelt blessing, asking God to bless, free, and heal that person. And that is a wonderful piece of advice for couples in the midst of a disagreement, in the midst of a conflict. When you feel that irritation starting to rise, to begin to pray for the other person, whether it's your spouse, whether it's your teenage child who's driving you crazy, to pray for the person, because what that does is it allows you to keep the anger in check and actually hear the need that's being expressed, the expectation, the unmet need that the person has. And when you come to understand that, that's how you grow in your knowledge and in your love as a couple and as a family.
I have seen this work in our lives, in my life especially. You know, when the children were all at home and we had contact daily, it was easier to guide them and to show them what was right and wrong and to know this was my responsibility. But now they're grown, and I have to trust that the seeds that we helped God plant are going to blossom in their lives. So when I'm on the phone with them and they're telling me about decisions they've made or things they've done, and I don't agree with them, it's very easy to feel angry. Oh my gosh, what happened? Why aren't they doing what we taught them? But this doesn't help the relationship at all. What really I have found helps is that I pray for them daily, that I know God gave them to John and I to guide and help him get to heaven. And now they're God's children, and how can I be angry at them when I'm praying for them and know that God loves them more than I do?
Claire, I know one of the things that is very important for you, and indeed it's highlighted in Amoris, is just the significance of sharing family meals together.
Yes, this is actually one of my favorite things to share with people, because it has formed our family into who we are as a family in the church. And it's simple, actually. It's just to make meals a priority. And the two most important meals are, first of all, the Eucharist. So we made it a priority to always go to Mass together. We made that, what we did first on the weekend. Yes, we worked it around our schedules, but we didn't miss it. Mm-hmm. And we knew that this is where we were fed with the graces that we needed to live our Catholic life. And second is we enjoy the dinner time, the dinner table. We make this the center of our day. We plan our schedule around it. When the children played sports, sometimes we didn't eat dinner till 9 o'clock at night, or we had to eat early. But what it didn't matter when we ate, it mattered that we were all together. And this was a time to share good food that God had blessed us with, a time to share our joys, our sorrows, what happened that day, what was going on in the news. And then it gave John and I an opportunity to share what the church teaches about these things.
And our own faith.
Exactly.
In the midst of those conversations.
That was very important, sharing how God had worked in our lives so that we could be a witness to them, but they were a witness to us too.
Absolutely.
Welcome back to the Amoris studio. It seems to me, just as the chat has gone on today and some of the things that we've watched, there's almost so much good advice in chapter 4 of Amoris. I mean, Dom, you're a dad of a good few small children, 5 small kids.
That is right. And I was chuckling to myself there about the not going to bed with any resentment. Sometimes when they don't go to sleep, and you're feeling the urge to argue them into their beds rather than hug them into their beds and sort of forgive them for being children. These are big challenges, big practical challenges.
But in terms of just taking one or two pieces of advice, in a busy life, as a dad of small children, where you want to do all these things, where's a good place to just start? Or what for you is the most important thing to try and keep it all together?
Well, I think there's some really good practical things that we can think of. I mean, the first one it was mentioned there in the clip, the idea of family dinners. I mean, how many of us would rather skip dinner time and not talk to another human being after a long day? But actually, if you spend time face to face with someone and you share a meal with them, whether they're 3 or whether they're 33, you will connect with them. And there's something that God has given us. When Jesus sits with us, we could say he comes to us in the Eucharist, but also he sat with his disciples and he sat with those with whom you could say he should have been disagreeing with. And within the family, that's the best piece of advice you might be able to give someone. Just spend an hour together, or maybe even 20 minutes, having a good quality family meal. Ask people how their day went.
What are the things that have struck you as you've read chapter 4 and that you've kind of brought into your own marriage?
Well, we meditated on it together, and I have to say, it's just, as they said in the insert there, it really is something that you can meditate on because it's so beautiful. There's so much in it, and it kind of connects very well with something that I'm involved in the Focalarium. We have this thing called the Cube of Love, or the Family Cube, which is all about the art of loving, because like the Pope is talking about, loving is an art, and that's something that really helps us a lot, and it's really clued in with the Amoris Laetitia. And one of the things is Be the First to Love, which is on the Amoris Cube as well. And that's something for our family that really helps us a lot.
What does that mean?
It means you don't wait for the other person. You know, like we were watching Netflix the other night and it's always going off. And that means somebody has to get up, turn it off, turn it on, turn the yoke on, turn it off. And, you know, I have my feet up. I want somebody else to do it. But you think, no, be the first to love. You know, and when we do that in our marriage, that creates such a dynamic that's so beautiful, you know, that you're getting up and, you know, Aidan will say, no, I'll get the tea, you know, and, you know, that this love, you generate this love that circulates and then that pours out on other people, I hope, as well. Obviously, you don't do it all. I mean, I fail many times as well, but it really, really helps, I think. And I think that's what Amoris is teaching us as well, really, this art of loving.
Everything seems to centre as well, though, around good communication. And for many of us, we're not born good communicators. Is there tools we can use to become better at communicating with one another? Well,
certainly the tools that I would advise people when they're coming to me, first of all, learn about each other. You really need to know about each other. And again, talking about the act of love. The act of love that's what it is. It's an act. It is not a feeling. It's a demand upon you to do something really special for that other person, to see them as, you know, you're looking at a human made in the image of God. If you can't see that in that other person that you're actively loving, well, then you're failing them. You're failing them in so many ways. You're failing even God's act in you when you don't love someone that's in front of you made in the image and likeness of God. That is really, and it's an act of love. It's committed to doing for. But I had to learn that. I mean, it's taken me 50 years. I can't imagine what it's like for the young people starting out. They have to learn about this whole idea that this human being that's been given into your care, and that's what it's about. We're being given into each other's care. We actively need to share that love that has been given to us with that other person. If you can't see that, that's a demonstration of how it is with you and God, then you have missed the plot, basically.
Dom, I know over the years you've done a lot of work on helping couples who are preparing for marriage, and especially you do a lot of work with Alpha. What are the kind of things that you tell couples are important to really focus on and think about?
Well, I mean, one of the marvellous elements in the Alpha marriage course is talking to people about how they respond when things go wrong. You know, are you a sort of spiky hedgehog person who just retreats and, you know, sort of fires darts at the other person? Or do you turn into a bull and start charging when things go terribly wrong? And sometimes in marriage and in family, things going wrong is really just what happens every day. Yeah. Basically, we spend our whole day dealing with things going wrong. And, you know, when you were talking about...
You're kind of firefighting. There's no time to do the actual cultivation of love.
And what you have to understand is all of us have our story. All of us have our way of dealing with something. We may not even realise what it is until it starts happening. So your daddy was an angry man or something, or he dealt with this thing in a certain way, and all of a sudden you find yourself, you know, doing this. And I was chuckling to myself with this marvellous cube, Be the First to Love. The only thing I can think of with that, sorry, I have to mention this, is changing nappies. Yeah. It's like the calculation is so tempting to tell, you know, when you have children, the nappies, yes. Sometimes I calculate to myself, I've changed thousands. But there's always another one. If you have another baby, there are nappies to change. And it's an unpleasant business. Who could put their hand up and say they love doing it? But it's still an act of love.
Yeah, love is in every nappy change. I can certainly identify with that. Just briefly before we finish up, for maybe families that are watching, and they may be admiring some of the stories they've heard today, but they feel at the moment their marriage is kind of stuck in a rut like that. It's the constant firefighting, it's the routine, it's the day in or day out, and they want to start somewhere to try and make things better. Susan, maybe you start with your advice and everyone else can follow. What would be the advice you'd give?
I think to be very honest with each other. you know, if there's a problem, say it, you know, but try and say it with love. And that, I mean, I remember that was a big discovery in my own marriage, because my parents actually split up, and you know, so when we got married, every time we did a row, I thought everything's going to break up and everything like that. And then realizing, no, that you have the grace of the sacrament, that you can actually start again, that we can love each other and we have that grace, and that we can keep going, you know. But it's very important to be honest, and when there's a problem, to say it. And like the others were saying, you know, men and women are so different, and everybody's so different, and we all bring this baggage with us from our, you know, our families that we grew up in. So, you know, to understand that, and that we're just different, and so we try to understand each other, you know, but to enter the other person, you know, and the same with our kids, to really try to enter their world, and to that it's a true love, you know, because then you change as well, you know, and it's very beautiful.
Well, the change does happen. We all change, and we're changed when we have children come into our family. We have the change when there's financial difficulties in the family. And there's a really, you know, marriage, I think it's an incredible, it's a learning place. In fact, it has been responsible for changing my heart, my mind, every bit of it about me. I don't think that a person on their own can have the changes happen in them unless they're in a relationship with somebody who is very different, but very importantly different. And so when we actually value that, or see that, and see what we're getting back for, even that discussion, the way in which we would challenge one another, these are all the repairs. It's like God taking a hand in making you change by giving you somebody into your care who can actually get those spots, hit that button, and bring about that change. We need to accept that. And when we do that and see it in that light, then our life becomes very different.
Well, I would simply say, going back to, I suppose, the beginning of it and what those couples were saying to us, this idea of there's a third person in this marriage.
Absolutely.
And sometimes when things are going wrong, the hardest thing you can do is say a prayer with your spouse. Absolutely the most difficult thing. Take their hand and pray. It's almost like you've got cement in your mouth. But I tell you what, in my own marriage, I've seen it make such a difference, because all of a sudden it shifts the focus away from the hurts and the pain, and you're looking at the Father, and that can make all the difference.
Well, my thanks to you all for joining us on the programme today. Coming up in episode 4 of the Amoris series, we'll focus on the social dimension of Amoris Laetitia, where we'll look at the love that Jesus calls us to, how that's a love that reaches out, that respects and embraces life from its very beginning, that cares for our neighbour and indeed for our common home. We look forward to you joining us again as we continue this conversation.